We will see if there's a court challenge for this, and we will see how these other recounts go. And hopefully we get another seat back. That would be nice.
That would be nice, and I hope that we can defend that seat in Windsor. The judicial recounts, only one has been completed, and that was the riding of Terrebonne, and that was in Quebec. And the judicial recount was overseen by a judge who was a Harper appointee. And it did win by one vote, which is why we always tell everybody it's super, super important to go and vote, even if you think it's not, because your vote could be that one vote that matters.
So, Liberals get to 170 seats after Quebec riding flips by single vote in judicial recount. Liberals inched another seat closer to a majority government on Saturday after a judicial recount left their candidate as the winner in the Quebec riding of Terrebonne. We're probably saying that wrong, by a margin of just one vote. An official with Elections Canada confirmed to the Canadian press that Liberal Tatiana Auguste will finish ahead of incumbent Bloc Québécois candidate Nathalie Sinclair-Desgagnés. It brings the Liberals to 170 seats in the House of Commons, too shy of the 172 needed for a majority government. The Bloc seat count falls to 22.
Auguste was initially projected to win the riding by 35 votes after the April 28th election, but on May 1st, following the required post-election validation process, Sinclair-Desgagnés, who was first elected in 2021, moved ahead by 44 votes. The win was returned to Auguste following the judicial recount, with Auguste receiving 23,352 votes and Sinclair-Desgagnés receiving 23,351 votes. A judicial recount is automatic when the number of votes cast for the candidate with the most votes and the number of votes cast for any other candidate is less than 0.1% of the valid votes cast. That was true in this case. The recount was to begin on Thursday and was completed Saturday. Elections Canada said last week that the recount would be overseen by Superior Court of Quebec Justice Daniel Turcotte. A validation process is done by the returning officer, who reviews the cumulative addition of votes in a riding from every poll based on the counts determined at every polling station in the presence of party scrutineers and the election officers. It does not recount the ballots or review ballots that were deemed to be invalid.
And here is just a breakdown of all of the seats as of today that have been won in Parliament and the breakdown by province. A judicial recount looks at all the ballots again, verifying the ones that were initially accepted and reconsidering ballots that were rejected. It takes place in the presence of a judge from a superior court in the affected province or territory. The recount in Terrebonne added 74 votes to the total number of valid votes and increased the vote count of 4 of the 6 candidates. Auguste gained 56 votes and Sinclair-Desgagnés gained 11. The Conservative candidate, Adrienne Charles, gained 5 votes, and the NDP candidate, Maxime Baudouin, gained 4. There are 3 more judicial recounts planned, 1 in Newfoundland, Labrador, and 2 in Ontario. And Tanya went over these earlier in the stream. But basically the one in Newfoundland, the lead of the Liberal is 12 votes. In the riding of Milton East, Halton Hills South is a Liberal lead of 29 votes. And in Windsor, Tecumseh Lakeshore, the lead is 77 votes, and that is being led by Conservative Kathy Borelli. So, this should answer the question, where did these votes come from? So one of the narratives going out there, which is completely false, is that they're in these recounts, they're finding votes. They're just like plucking them out of midair, or they're just like, pulling them out of their pocket. That's not what's happening here. These found votes are not being found. What's happening is, in the validation process, rejected ballots are being examined by the judge, and they are looking at every single one to see if, okay, well, should this one have been counted? Should this one have been rejected or not? And that's where these votes are coming from, where the judge is saying, actually, that one that was rejected, that should be in. That one that was rejected, that should be in. That one that was rejected, yes, that should have been rejected. So that's part of this whole process. And that's how you ended up with this difference. Now, this is actually potentially a good thing for the riding of Terra Nova because it's only 12 votes. Only 12 votes.
They might be able to close that gap.
So it's possible that that might flip conservative after the judicial recount, which would be really nice to see. The one that's least likely to flip of these three is actually the one that is held by the conservative because they're up by around 77 votes. So that's a pretty high, it's pretty darn close, don't get me wrong. But as far as we've seen from judicial recounts, that's pretty high to have a big swing. Right?
It's possible. I mean, if it does happen to go to the Liberal, we won't. I mean, it's done in front of a judge. It's done with all these people in the room, which we're going to get into. We're not going to think it's nefarious or rigged or something like that. But to us, that's the one that's least likely to change.
Right.
Just based on that gap, 77 votes. That's quite a few.
So let's keep going. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is from the Elections Canada Judicial Recount Handbook, and Tanya's looked into this more than I have, so she'll be starting at paragraph 2.
A judicial recount is a formal means of verifying the count of the votes cast for an electoral district. It is presided over by a judge of a superior court who sits in the electoral district where the election results are validated. The recount may be conducted by adding the number of votes reported in the statements of the vote or by counting the ballots. As mentioned in section 1.1 above, there are two types of recounts. Automatic, the returning officer must submit a request for a recount to a judge, and on application of an elector, the elector must apply to a judge for a recount.
So just to pause there. So the Windsor riding, that actually was not an automatic recount. That was a requested recount by an elector. So that was actually the Liberal, Mr. Kuzmierchuk, who actually requested a judicial recount on that, and that was granted. So that is an example of that.
A judicial recount is conducted by a judge, but it is important to note that the judge is acting as a persona designata under the Act. This can be seen, for example, from the fact that the Act specifically grants the judge some powers that would be inherent if they were working on a traditional judicial capacity. Example, the power to summon witnesses and require the giving of evidence on oath with, quote, the same power that is vested in any court of record, end quote. The judge has the powers granted under the Act, but the Act recognizes that the formality of a court process may be curtailed in service of the goal of a speedy and final resolution of the election.
So, one of the two different types of counts or recounts that the previous section talked about was automatic judicial recounts, and this is where it's defined. So this type of judicial recount occurs automatically upon a close result. A judicial recount must take place if the difference between the number of votes cast for the candidate with the most votes and the number of votes cast for any other candidate is less than 1/1000th of the valid votes cast. So this is where we end up with the automatic recounts. So no one asked for these other recounts. Per the Act, they are just done automatically. So that's where they're coming from. And there's one more section here because this is really important because it's going to allow us to kind of further talk about the Terrebonne recount.
So this actually came in to us as a question. I think it was on Twitter. And we thought it was a good question that we wanted to share with everybody. So who is present at the recount? Attendees at the recount. Schedule 4 to the Act contains a list of persons who are entitled to attend the recount. Only the following persons may be present during the recount. So only these people, nobody else. Number 1, the judge, and then the returning officer. The staff that the returning officer asks to assist in the recount. The recount teams, each consisting of a handler, a recorder, and one representative appointed by each candidate who wishes to be represented on the recount team. Each candidate, up to 2 representatives per candidate who are not members of a recount team. 1 legal counsel per candidate. legal counsel for the chief electoral officer, and any other person whom the judge allows to observe the recount, including the media.
Now, the recounts aren't the end of this. Okay, so let's just take into account the Terrebonne recount. So the Bloc incumbent, MP Desgagnés, phenomenal phenomenal MP for the Bloc, despite she's representing the wrong party, but she was very, very good in committee. This was the person we used to refer to as Barnaby's new girlfriend that he should be looking at. And so consider the fact that when this recount was being done, she or her designated staff were actually present for that recount, most likely, watching this happen, because she was the one that was at risk of losing the seat. And just imagine what they were going through when they actually saw that they ended up losing by 1 vote. Now, the decision is final, kind of, because what ends up happening is once everything is done and the writ is returned, that's the way it's termed, and that's supposed to happen, I believe, by the 19th of May. Then the challenge period begins. And what this is this allows any candidate to put forth a legal challenge to the result in their riding within 30 days. So you haven't heard anything from the Bloc with regard to this recount. If you think about it, if there was anything extremely sketchy going on, you would either expect to hear it from the Bloc, or you would expect to see a legal challenge. Now, they may issue a legal challenge anyway because they lost by 1 vote. But that's something to consider. Now, with regard to legal challenges, there's really only been, I believe, 2 in the last 30, 40 years. One, I believe, was in 2011, and I think another one may have been in 1988, something like that. So just consider that, in that if the Bloc has the most to lose here, because it's their seat that actually was going to be lost. So if they notice anything suspicious, they're the ones that are going to be the most vocal about this.
Right. And there is one more thing that I want to point out. In this riding of Terrebonne, there are 89,725 eligible voters. Now, the turnout for this riding was 61,118 voters, which means 28.6 thousand people in that riding did not vote. And this is why we say it is so important. And yes, absolutely, your vote matters. Could you imagine if Ryan and I were in this riding and just hypothetically, neither of us had voted, that those 2 votes could have been enough to change the riding.
Right. Or, the neighbors of somebody in the riding
right.
said, oh, what's the point?
This is the point.
That's the point.
This is the point right here. And that's why we're very, very big on exercising your democratic right to vote, because it is so important. And we see it in very rare cases like this where it is off by 1 vote.
Now, nobody that voted Conservative is pleased with the results of the election. It goes without saying. The issue is we can't be immediately jumping to this election was rigged because we don't like the result, right? The Conservatives have been very clear. None of them believe there's any rigging going on in this election. There will have been anomalies, as there are with any election, as we've said, but there's nothing there concrete to be able to say this election was rigged. It's just a result that we didn't like. Now, we will see if there's a court challenge for this, and we will see how these other recounts go. And hopefully hopefully we get another seat back. That would be nice.
That would be nice, and I hope that we can defend that seat in Windsor.
Right. So, it sucks, and believe me, like, we were ticked. I'm still ticked off about it, but we got to move forward at this point and get back to work, and that's what we're trying to do here. So.
Well, and I think that of all the people we spoke to when we were in Ottawa last week, and like I said, we must have spoken to about 36 people who were involved in the election in some way or another. Some of them are MPs, some of them are new MPs, some of them are candidates who were not successful, some of them were scrutineers, some of them were on the board for their EDA. We spoke to pretty much everybody, and not once out of any of their mouths came the words that this was rigged. A lot of people were very disappointed, and I think we all are.
Well, and most of the disappointment actually came from people working at the polls, and they were seeing these ballots as scrutineers, and they were seeing these ballots come through, and they're just like, they just saw ballot after ballot of people signing them. And it's like...
Yes, you cannot sign your name on the ballot. I'm actually going to drop a link here in the chat that shows what is acceptable for when they're counting ballots and what is not. And this kind of goes to what they were arguing in Windsor, why they requested a judicial recount, because... two things that you have to do for your ballot. Number one, you have to make your vote intention clear. So if you put like a check mark on one and an X on the other, they're not going to know who you're actually voting for. So that ballot, for example, would be considered spoiled. The other thing you cannot do is identify yourself in any way. So you can't write your name, you can't put your signature, your initials, your phone number, nothing like that. So that's why they were trying to argue that these ballots in Windsor that had like a positive message for Kazmierczuk should be allowed, because the intention was clear and they were not identifying themselves. So that's the argument. Let me just drop that link in chat, and if you're listening after the fact, we'll make sure that we put that link in the description of the video for you to see.